BDELL 101.
Be Frankie.
Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix. Yeah, I'm striving for greatness, trying to make it out, we're stuck in the matrix.
Yo, what's good? It's your boy BDELL. If you're new to this channel, hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. But today I'm going to be breaking down the spiritual apparatus of the prophecies of Hollow Earth, the Crystal City, extraterrestrial entities, and mermaids, and how it's correlated to the spiritual metamorphosis of the Golden Age. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we must extrapolate this information in this demonstration, meaning that I'm going to give you an intrinsic amount of clarity that basically is correlated with my receipts that I'm going to be showing you guys today. Now, you've been hearing about this phenomenon about, mermaids and entities coming from the ocean. And I'm going to demonstrate that before we get into the presentation, because the inception of the story started with a woman. She came across a story talking about these mermaids on a boat that was connected to a certain organization, and how the elites were basically eating these mermaids. So that's why, the phenomenon of mermaids and everybody's talking about it. That's where the inception of the story came from. So before we get started, I'm going to show you a video that basically demonstrates everything that I'm basically talking about, to where you can get clarification about everything. So with that being said, we're going to start out with the video. So like I said, if you're new to the channel, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. This is one of those videos where you're going to have to get your notes out on. This is one of those videos to where you got undeniable proof backed by this video that's connected to the receipts that I'm basically going to demonstrate all throughout the presentation, right? So that's why it's imperative to understand what's going on as we get through the Great Awakening period. Because the pole shift is basically going to expose the liquid crystal polarization that controls the dualistic paradox. It's going to expose everything. The veil is officially lifted. We just had the blood moon on March 14th, right? That was basically the inception point of the beginning of the dematerialization of monotheistic religion. So this is why they want to enforce globalization. Globalization basically is denoting the fact that it's the end of the corporate system. It's the end of the Roman occupational government that basically took you out of your sovereign capacity. So this is why they got to hit you with full disclosure about everything that's taking place on the planet right now. Because as we get through this Great Awakening period, as we in Solar Cycle 25, these entities is going to start to reveal themselves. And I'm going to prove it to you as we get through the presentation. But first, we must start out with this video. This is one of those videos you want to share this video to people who have this, especially if you're connected to people and friends and family members who think everything is a conspiracy theory. Show them this video, right? Because I got all the receipts that's going to back up everything that this woman is basically saying, that she came across a mermaid story. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we finna get straight to it.
Somebody told me the coolest story about a company that catches big fish, if you can call them that kind of feel like us a little bit, but they do it for a living. So this guy named Landon, he's like 28 years old. He's living with his parents. He's fresh out of prison. He bounces back and forth from job to job. And finally his parents put him out on his ass. They're like, look, you need to go call your cousin. He has a fishing charter, get in touch with him and see if you can't go to work for your cousin Travis. He gets in touch with Travis. Landon leaves the Midwest and goes to the East Coast to this little fishing community. It's all about fishing charters. This is like their main means of income in this community. Well, he gets out there, he stays a couple of days, and they're getting ready to go back out, and then he finds out it's not his cousin's fishing charter anymore. He lost his fishing charter. So he meets up with a couple of guys. We're just going to use this picture as an example. He meets up with the crew, and this other guy, which they call Captain Burgess, we're going to call him Captain Burgess, was running this charter. And he was like, wait a minute, dude, this is not what you told me. You know, you didn't tell me up until now that this was not your crew. So Landon's like, okay, fuck it, let's just go ahead and do it. Work's work, right? Especially when you're a felon. So they get out to this boat, and it's not like a little bitty dingy boat or anything like that, but it's not a huge boat. It's like a medium size, okay? And Travis is showing Landon all around the boat, and they walk into this room. They had left the kitchen area, and he showed him where the bunks were and everything else. Well, they walked through to get to the bunks through a room that had some tanks in it, okay? But these weren't normal at all. It was kind of like this, but it had a bluish fluid in it, okay? And he said that it had wheels on it, and there were these little things that snapped down to the ground to hold it in place, but you could...
The bluish fluid that she's basically talking about is a receptor tank that has biosludge in it that basically dematerializes the anatomy of the mermaids. So I had to give you that clarification as we get through the story.
But you could also unsnap them and you could wheel it around. Kind of like this color. So out of curiosity, he's like, Travis, what are those for? And he was like, oh, those are for the big payday. Okay, those are from when we get big bonus. That's big bonus time. And he explains to him that Captain Burgess has a very specific clientele over certain types of fish that they will get a mega bonus, okay? Well, after he finishes doing all that, and they go and they eat dinner and they're getting ready to push out or whatever, Captain Burgess approaches him and wants him to sign a piece of paper. And he said that on this piece of paper, it basically states that anything that you see out here, you're not to come back and talk about it. Basically like a little NDA. He said the first 2 days they were out there, it was just regular fish. Well, it was a stormy night, and they were going to head back in because it was going to be really bad. And Captain Burgess had all this equipment in his office and everything else, you know. And he was like, no, we're not going back in. We got something big. It's all hands on deck. You know what I mean? They're all outside. It's pouring rain. It's storming. And they bring the net up. Okay? They bring this net that had been down at the bottom all day that day up. And he said what he saw inside was like nothing he had ever seen before, probably ever will again if he ever lives to tell the story again. He said that it was like a pasty, whitish green skin, okay? And the fin, okay, from like the hip bone down, like the hip bones were huge. But from there down, it was just like the body of a fish. And he said that it was like bright, greenish white, silvery scales. And very slimy. And like greenish black hair. And wasn't pretty. But this one in particular wasn't putting up very much of a fight. And it spoke. He said that he couldn't understand what language it was speaking in, but it felt like it was begging for its life. So Burgess is screaming, get the tank. They get it rolled out there. The fluid in it sloshing all over the place. They get her in there and she sinks to the bottom and she's just pleading for her life, underwater, pleading for her life. And he's like, I did not sign up for this. What the fuck is going on? And so he asked his cousin that night and he's like, don't make a big deal out of this right now. Don't do it. Well, something really sinister is afoot and he doesn't even realize it. They end up pushing off, okay, the storm starts to calm down or whatever, and they ended up going to port, and they went to a different warehouse, and they took this siren to a different warehouse, and it was set up like a restaurant. Come to find out, these clientele, he had sonar machines and everything to track these things down, okay, like stuff that you would not even believe if you saw it. And they were all there, the crew was there and everything else. And these people, okay, that had him go and catch this thing. And they say it's like really common among the wealthy. And they put it on a gurney. they pushed it out, and they all had their knives and forks and everything else. It was set up like hibachi, sort of. It's a really long story, and I'm trying to shorten it down, but to make a long story short, they ended up going back out one more time, and he's struggling with himself. And he said he didn't know if he could ever watch or see that thing scream like that again, because you know what they did with it, right? And he said that he was really, really struggling with his humanity, but he took the next job because it paid so well. He was like, it paid so well. So they ended up not seeing any on the next 4 or 5 trips out, and he was like, thank God that's over. Well, they ended up running into another one, but this one was a fighter. And it didn't look the same, okay? Like, this one had a blackish toned skin with white colored hair.
Now, let me interject. Now, I also got a video that backs up the edification and the synopsis that she's basically, displaying in this video. She said it was basically black. And I have a video of a guy who was doing studies, and he was connected to some type of KGB or CIA organization, and he came across these black mermaids, and he said they were to be about 7 feet tall and things of that nature. And I have a video that basically demonstrates that synopsis. So after this video, I'm going to show you that video.
Whitish green colored hair. He was like, it was super duper weird, but these things do actually exist. But if you want to hear more about it, because he told me 3 of them, he said he only experienced 3 times, and that he basically was in fear for his life because of the clientele. And he's like, I will never reveal who they are. He was like, but they're pretty high up and people do know who they are. Somebody told me a story about a company that catches really big fish, but they're not fish, okay? If you haven't seen my first mermaid and sirens video that I made the other day, it's the first pinned video on my page, or you're not going to understand this video at all. So like I said, they went back out on the water. They'd been out 5 or 6 more times and hadn't seen anything until finally they did, but this time it looked different, and this one was a fighter. Now, I think it's fair to say that, they fish normal fish, okay, because they have to have their cover up, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, they have all of these fancy devices in Captain Burgess's office, or whatever you want to call it, his cabin, to where he actually has equipment to track these sirens down. And like I said before in the video, he has a very specific clientele, and each one of them have, different things they are doing. The first one was a meal, but anyway. So they get the second one, they get the tank out there, they finally get her in it because she has got nails, you know what I mean? And she scratches one of the guys named Luke. We're going to call him Luke. But they finally get the mer woman, whatever you want to call it, siren, over in there, and she is thrashing. She is not having it. The first one was docile. This one is not going. Now, in the process, like I said, she scratched the guy named Luke, and it was pretty deep. He's being attended to, whatever, off to the side. They're trying to get her to go all the way in so they can lock it down. And they end up damaging her. I think he said that what happened was her hand she was trying to claw her way out, and they slammed the lid, and when they did it, took them fingers off, all the tips of them. Now, this very specific set of clientele that was going to purchase her, you know what I'm saying? They didn't want damaged materials, so they ended up having to find another buyer. Okay, Captain Burgess ended up having to find another buyer for a damaged one. And when I say she was a fighter, they were having to do every hour checks on this tank that's in a very specific location on this boat. So each one of them would have to do a rotation. And they're going further off to an island to the new buyer or whatever that will accept a damaged siren. And so they're having to feed her. Now, don't ask me how they did it. He never actually said how they got the food to her, but they were feeding her. Well, Landon is already struggling with his humanity because of what happened to the last one, and it was a very docile one. And this one is not. And he said that he had to go in there and feed her, and that one of the fingers had grown back. So they can
Now, I'm also going to demonstrate on how the regeneration transformation system is also associated with the physiology of so-called black people, who was also connected to these black mermaids in the ocean. I'm going to demonstrate that as we get to the presentation as well.
Regenerate. So he tells his cousin Travis, he's like, look, I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, dude, he was like, this is not one of those gigs that you can just walk in and walk out. That's not going to happen. So this particular buyer ended up being a big time military person within some type of, I don't want to say military, I don't think it was military, but it's one of them things that even presidents don't know about. You know what I mean? Like a secret research island. And Burgess tells him when they get there that, hey, look, you know, we told you she was damaged, but one of the fingers has grown back. Okay, so at this point, they already knew that they were going to grow back. Okay, they already knew. So that means they've been researching on these things for a very long time. But he did say that he wasn't allowed to go back, but when the door opened, that he could see where Burgess and the buyer had walked back, that there were more than just sirens back there. There were cages with things that he had never seen before. He didn't even know how to put them into words.
Now, remember, you got to read Dr. Malachi York's book called Argartha and Shambhala. When you break down the etymology of the word Shambhala, it means the scent of Allah. So Argartha is basically a subterranean kingdom that is basically connected to Hollow Earth. And Hollow Earth, you have these factions of deep underground military bunker systems that has a place called Nightmare Hall. And in Nightmare Hall, that's where they keep a great majority of these cryptids, or whatever you call an extraterrestrial entity. They have the ability to genetically modify by way of genetic mutation to create these entities, and they keep them in Nightmare Hall underground, right? So that's where the experimentation projects basically derive from.
He also stated that this is the longest time that he had ever been out with this particular crew, and that he was gone probably a month. And we'll get into what happened during that amount of time, but this is getting kind of long. The company that catches really big fish, only they're not fish. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, they're pinned to the top of my profile, or you won't understand this at all. So the second mermaid, she's a thrasher, and they take her to this facility that's on an island that clearly does research. One of the crew members had been scratched by this mermaid before they put her in the tank, and it cut the tips of her fingers off. And then Landon went back to later realize that one of them had grown back. Now, this isn't common amongst them. So, like, with human beings, I would say that some of them have abilities that other ones don't. And this one could regenerate. So that's probably why this facility wanted this particular damaged one. So they get her to the facility. And like I said in the previous video, he wasn't allowed to go into the back with Captain Burgess and the new buyer, okay, who was clearly the head of this black op facility, okay? Definitely not government, but a little bit in deeper than the government would be, I would suggest. And he said when the door opened, there were creatures like you had never seen in cages all over the place, okay? The guy that got scratched on board, something starts to happen to him within like just a few hours. He said it was like something straight out of Resident Evil, like something started growing out of his arm. He said it got him on the arm and the face for like a week. Remember when I told you they were gone for like a month? And this is their longest time out. Like, Luke has a wife and kids, family. You know, Travis has a girlfriend. All the crew members have someone significant at home, and this is the longest time that they've ever been out. 1 month. So Luke gets successfully treated or whatever, and he has to go back like every 3 months and pick up these injections, but at a cost. Landon described it as the strangest looking EpiPen he's ever seen in his life, okay? Because it wasn't an EpiPen. Anyway, but this is a different story because this is really long. They sail off, okay, they leave from this research facility island, whatever it was. And they go out back into the water, whatever, and they're just doing regular fishing, okay? Nothing happens for like the first week and a half after this. It's like 2.5 weeks that they've been gone, maybe more. They go back to their port, but they are told by Captain Burgess, do not disembark the boat. We are going right back out. No one is to disembark. And they are taking orders from this guy like he is their commander-in-chief. Captain Burgess does disembark, and he's gone for about a day and a half. Well, at this time, Landon and Travis and Luke are getting together. Luke is scared shitless because he has no idea what's in these little EpiPen-looking things. They never told him, or what the hell that was growing out of his arm. But this is getting kind of long, so I'll do another part to this because it's going to take me like probably 6 parts to get this all in. Part 4 to the company that catches really big fish, only they're kind of like us. If you know what I mean. Mermaids. If you haven't seen parts 1 through 3, they're pinned to the top of my profile, or you won't understand this. So they pull into port, and Burgess disembarks, but tells the rest of the crew, do not disembark. We are going right back out. And typically, he would have let them disembark. He was gone for a day and a half, but they didn't know how long he was going to be gone. 20 minutes? A day? 2 days? And Luke is getting worried because, like I said, the thing scratched him. They treated him for a week at that biolab, whatever it was, allegedly. They give him this strange EpiPen because something starts growing out of it, only it's not an EpiPen, okay? So they're sitting around and they're talking, just the three of them. The rest of the crew, they're kind of sketchy people. We'll get into them later. That's another story. Sketchier. Let me just put it like that. Dangerous. At this point, Landon, Luke, and Travis start to feel like this is more of a containment situation, if you catch my heavy drift. Because Luke is like, okay, they want me to come back to this facility that I don't know how to get to on my own, can't get to on my own without the help of Burgess, to get these pins every 3 months, and so they can research me now. And he doesn't yet know how much this is going to cost. So they hatch this plan that they're going to try when they disembark again. If they're told that they can't disembark, that they're going to attempt to break into Burgess's cabin, his office type thing, just so they can try to find out a little bit more about what they're dealing with him in general. But they know it can only be one of them. You got the rest of the crew on there too, and it's like they're always hovering. Especially around Luke. It's like I said, it feels like a containment situation. Let's keep him contained and not let him out in the public yet. Captain Burgess finally returns, like I said, a day and a half later, and tells him that they are going to be shoving off, but they're going to be going over off the coast of Maine to a set of islands. And they're going to be doing regular fishing over there. Well, Burgess has never been a sit down and play spades with me kind of guy, okay? And suddenly he's checking up on Luke. Hey, buddy, how you doing? You know, how you feeling? It feels very sinister, the way he's trying to buddy up to him. And there was a reason. Now, Luke has to use a special EpiPen like every 6 to 7 hours, or he starts to feel different. He starts having dreams of things happening underwater that he never actually experienced. Now, in these dreams, which was very specific, he is seeing underwater, breathing underwater, having conversations with other mer people. He had been working for Burgess for over 24 months, okay? I think they said like 27 months or something like that. So he never really had empathy for him before, but he's developing it now. They go up to Maine, they're fishing, doing regular fishing for like 2 days, and then suddenly something happens to Luke. He starts feeling, he can feel that some are near. It's like, why does Burgess need these devices now? Because now he has his own mermaid detector. And normally it would have been okay for Luke, but now he has empathy for him. But at this time, he's still new to what's happening to him, and he doesn't realize that his mermaid detector is going off. So that night, he's talking to Landon and Travis, and they're sitting down eating and playing cards and stuff like that and having a drink. And he's like, look, something's happening to me, and I don't know what it is. And Landon's like, maybe you just need to go up on a dose of your epi shot. And he reluctantly goes and tells Burgess, because that's the only connection he has to this place that's treating him, what's happening to him. Tells him about the dreams or nightmares, the visions, and then tells him that he's having strange sensations all over his body. Like tingling, tunnel vision, and like hearing like the languages that these mer people were speaking in. Burgess tells him it's
language that they typically speak is cuneiform language, because cuneiform language is an alphabetical symmetry of light that is connected to the stars. It's a light language. It's a light language that is basically come from Atlantis and Lemuria when you're talking about the Hyperboreans and things of that nature. So that's pretty much the basis of the story. So now we finna get into the segue of the presentation. So now I did some intrinsic research, right? I did some really deep research talking about these mermaids, but the organization that she was talking about, the company that was basically extracting the great majority of these mermaids to the elites, It's called Trident Seafoods. Now, one thing is crazy about the key owner that owned the company. He went to high school in the city that I live in Evansville, Indiana. He went to North High School, and I will basically show you that. It says his education is North High School, Evansville, Indiana. You cannot make this up. And they also named a football field after his name, right? So his name is Chuck Bundren. And he's also did a lot of philanthropy with with the Ukrainians, and you all know where the inception of the Ukrainians come from. The Ukrainians are basically connected to the Canaanite faction, where you get the apex of cannibalism from, right? I'm gonna demonstrate that as we get to the presentation. So it's not a coincidence that this company that basically extracts mermaids to the elites, because the elites are basically the foundational blueprint of the bloodline of the Canaanite. That is the cursed seed of Leviticus. So this is why they need to eat, other entities and the great majority of black people to basically take upon the genetic format of those who had those intrinsic immortalized cell lines. So now, one thing you got to understand is that, everything that's coming from the factions of, the apex of the Canaanite culture, the trident is basically an emulation of the Khazarian Tamga, and the Khazarian Tamga is also an emulation of the sigil of Moloch. So it's not a coincidence that you see this entity, Poseidon, who was also connected to Zeus, right? Because Zeus is basically the king of the underworld when you're talking about these celestial seas, and he has a trident, and the trident is also associated with the so-called devil, right? And you see him right here with the mermaid. Now, when you study transgressive neoclassical art, it's going to show you the edification about mermaids, right? Even when you understand Japanese folklore. When you understand Japanese folklore, it also demonstrates the edification about mermaids. In ancient Japanese folklore, mermaids is a human-fish hybrid creature. A legend states that consuming its flesh grants immortality. So one thing you got to understand about the physiology of the inception of creation and those beings and so-called black people, one thing you got to understand is that divine food is divine immortality to those who have the cursed genetics, because their genetics doesn't harmonize with nature and it doesn't harmonize with the sun, as we're in solar cycle 25. So in order to create this elixir of immortality, they have to consume those who are connected to the planet. These are your so-called indigenous people, black people, mermaids, extraterrestrial entities. When you're talking about the Elohim and the Anunnaki, right? A lot of our bloodline comes from that faction. A lot of our bloodline is connected to the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, the Aztecs, and the Incas, and the Olmecs, right? We have an intrinsic bloodline that is connected to something that's way beyond the three-dimensional paradox, right? That's way beyond, the limitations of third density. That's what you got to understand. So who became immortal after eating the mermaids, right? It says that he lived for about 800 years. And then you also got to study the Yok-Yoks tribe out in Australia, because one thing you got to understand about Australia, right? When you understand the geographical blueprint of the ice wall, right? You got the lands beyond the ice wall. And right above Australia, beyond the ice wall, is Asgard, right? That's what you got to understand, because Asgard is connected to Lemuria and the Hyperboreans and the Atlanteans, right? When you get to the apex of the story. So this is why they was doing all that stuff with the Thor movie and things of that nature. Now, one thing you got to understand also is that humans have only explored about 5% of the ocean, which is the largest living space on Earth. So that means that 95% of the ocean is uncharted and unexplored. So that basically denotes the fact that the great majority of these mermaids are actually real. Otherwise, you wouldn't have transgressive neoclassical art in museums that basically demonstrates the reality of mermaids, right? And it also specifies it in the book of Enoch, right? Which is basically a book that was redacted from the Bible, right? Because it talks about the inception of creation in time when you're talking about the Nephilim. Also, right? We're going to get into that as well. So it tells you in the book of Enoch, chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. It says, Uriel said to me, here shall stand the angels have connected themselves with women and their spirits, assuming many different forms and defiling mankind, and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Here shall they stand to the day of the great judgment, which is basically the abomination of desolation, in which there shall be judgment will be made in the end. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens, right? So just like you have two different factions of Anunnaki, you have two different factions of mermaids. You have a siren and you have a mermaid. A mermaid is basically the epitome of a Luciferian Anunnaki that basically went against the order of Anu, so they basically transmuted into a lower state, right? So when you go to chapter 95 of the book of Enoch, for suddenly shall sinners perish from before you. You shall exercise dominion over them according to your will. In the day of sufferings of sinners, your offspring shall be elevated and lifted like eagles. Your nest shall be more exalted than the rest of the heavens, shall ascend into the intercavities of earth. That's when you get your hollow earth theory when you're talking about the crystal city, into the clefts of the rocks and forever, like conies. From the sight of the ungodly shall groan over you forever and weep like sirens. So it also talks about this by way of biblical context. This is why I said, do not throw away your Bibles, because in the end times, you got to condemn the European nations with it. That's what the Prophet Noble Jewel Ali said, right? And also it tells you in Maccabees chapter 15, verses 21, neither the melodies of the sirens nor the songs swans attract attention of the hearers, and the voices of children. Also, now we're going to get into the Black Mermaid phenomenon. Black Mermaid stories are rooted in African diasporic traditions, particularly in West Africa, right? When you're talking about the Dogon tribe in Mali, we're going to get to that as well. So the West African cosmology, where they are seen as sacred water spirits embodying both beauty and power, right? Which is connected to Gomer Dabar, which is wisdom, strength, and beauty, and often associated with wealth, healing, and even destruction. And key aspects of the origins, you got African cosmology's Black Mermaid lore is deeply connected to ancient African religions and spiritual practices, particularly those centered around water and its role in life and the spirit world. And it's also connected to, Mami Wata. When you study the Orishas, this is a prominent water spirit, sometimes depicted as a mermaid or a snake charmer, revered for wealth, healing, protection, with stories told throughout West Africa. Because one thing you got to understand about, the Dogon tribe in Mali, which came from West Africa as well, they had the constellations mapped out way before NASA was even created. So that's how these entities understood the ideologies of as above, so below, because they basically came from the Sirius star constellation, right? And you got other figures, similar figures like Yemayal and La Siren and the Haitian spirit of the sea highlight diversity of the water spirit beliefs. So this is why you got to read this book right here, and it talks about the Sibyls. Now, Sibyl is basically a prophetess, which is basically the epitome of a seer, right? Meaning that they have the ability to understand prophetic divination by way of premonitions. So the first prophetess of Mami Wata, which is basically a mermaid, and the theft of African prophecy by the Catholic Church. So in the name of Jesus, the Catholic Church used to slaughter these mermaids. They used to slaughter Black women who were connected to these mermaids, because they gave them the ability of clarification to see beyond the illusion, to give them healing and protection amongst their civilizations, right? So they were basically killed off because they was basically seen as witches, basically. So this is why the great majority of the Sibyls were actually crones. Crones in folklore is an old woman who may be characterized as disagreeable, malicious, sinister in a manner. Because why? Because you're going against the mythology of European monotheistic religious systems, often with magical, supernatural associations that can make her either helpful or obsolete. The crone is also an is an archetypal figure or a wise woman. That's what a seer is. A seer is a sibyl. A sibyl is a prophetess. Most of the prophetess is connected to these mermaids. So that's why the great majority of the women on the planet, those who is tapped in to the energetic frequency of the soul, they have the ability to understand everything on a sacred level. This is why they want the black woman's genes. When you're talking about Henrietta Lacks, because she had immortalized cell lines that created a regeneration transformation system that was connected to her genetic format, right? This is why the great majority of black women come up missing on the planet, because their genetics is connected to something higher. When you're talking about these sirens and these mermaids, right? So it's not a coincidence that the elite eat these individuals, right? We're going to get into it today. So yeah, I forgot to show you a video talking about the Black Mermaids, right? The Black Mermaid stories are rooted in African traditions, right? So I'm going to show you this video for a second. All right. Here we go. So this guy, he's basically talking about his experience of what he's seen. I think he's like a CIA or a KGB, organization member. So I'm gonna show you this video, and he's basically talking about how the great majority of these mermaids are actually black.
So that you can have a look at that. I'm very pleased about it because normally we perceive aliens to be white, and that's never sat very comfortably with me, frankly, when I know that it's not the case. This particular group are a black group, and they're very benign, very friendly. I have encountered them, though I can't say that I'm anything like an expert on them, but I have encountered them. They are not reptilian. The questioner uses the word reptilian. I can understand that because when you look at them, you would see the scales, you would see the whole shape, but the correct term is amphibian. They are a hybridized form of human and amphibian. They are black-skinned. They model themselves a little bit on human culture. That's because they have existed in the oceans of this planet. The 8 pollinated gods.
See, that's how you know the receipts are basically receipting. This video basically backs up the video that I extracted from TikTok. Make sure you follow that older lady who was propagating that edification in the story of talking about the mermaids and how she's seen how the story of how the guy on the boat seen a black mermaid, right? The great majority of everything extracted from the inception of creation started with blackness. That's dark matter energy. All these extraterrestrial entities, all these, entities or whatever you call them, cryptids, the great majority of them are so-called black skin, right? That's what you must understand. You got to understand your genetic format and how it's associated with everything that's taking place right now, right? So I think I got another video that's basically connected to this, because what you got to understand is that the great majority of these extraterrestrials, they come from the ocean, right? The great majority of them actually come from the ocean. And you got to read the book Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. He also demonstrates the edification of how the great majority of these UFOs and these extraterrestrial entities come from the water, because he was a naval intelligence officer, and during his excavation on a ship, he seen a UFO come from the water, right? He talks about that in the beginning of the monologue of the book, right? So if you've been paying attention to the timeline and you've been studying this stuff for long periods of time, you can see how everything basically lines up, right? So it also talks about in the book of Enoch, when you have a second root race, you have a race underneath the earth's crust. So it says ships sailing to the inside. In the Bible, in the book of Enoch, in the ancient writings of the Chinese, the Kemites, Eskimos, Hindus, talk about the opening in the North Pole, which is basically the Arctic Circle, where you have the land of magnets. The land of magnets is where you have the black pyramid that connects to the black sun, which is basically connected to the galactic center when you understand the inception and the beginning of creation. So the wise men of the brown races also teach that there is a race of men under the earth's crust. Also, some of their ancestors came from the interior of the earth. This drawing shows you the needle of the compass works while explorers are passing to the interior of Earth. Notice how the compass leads them out, again, not knowing that the Earth was basically hollow, right? So it tells you in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics that mermaids are basically real, right? They tell you by way of Kemetic spirituality that mermaids are real, right? It tells you in the writings. Now, remember, I was telling you that the Yok-Yoks, which is basically a nomenclature title for mermaids in Australia, right outside Australia, outside the firmament, not outside the firmament, but outside the ice wall, is Asgard, right? Asgard, that's connected to the movie of Thor and things of that nature. See, this is what they do. They give you the illusion of mythology by way of the movies when really they telling your ass the truth the whole time. And this is from an old map that was extracted from the Germany regime, who was also working with Madame Blavatsky when you understand the Theosophical Society. When she was talking about the second root race originated from Hyperborea and the later races of Lemuria and Atlantis, right? That's where the great majority of these entities come from, whence they came down from the Sirius star constellation, right? And it was basically entrapped by the firmament. Now, when you study the Nomos, right, they're basically dolphin and whale people, right? Because like I was telling you, the Dogon tribe had the constellations mapped out right before NASA was even created. So it tells you right here that the Nomos are a race of beings that takes the physical form of dolphins, whales, mermaids, mermen, and their homeworld is a planet in the Sirius star system, right? That's when you got, that trilateral connection of the trinity of the suns, which is Utu, Apsu, and Shamash, right? That is also connected to the Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kachina and the red star Kachina. But that's a whole different transmission. The Nomos play an important role in the Earth's evolution. Right now, they are the guardians and the guides of the portion of etheric Syrians who are dolphin, whale, mermaid, and merman bodies in order to maintain the biosphere of the planet. Now, since the European establishment, they're basically fucking up the ecosystem, which manipulates the ecosystem, right? They're messing up the ecology of the planet. So when you mess up the ecology of the planet, that is going to cause the pole shift. When you have that pole shift, that's when the great majority of these entities are going to start to reveal themselves, right? So it tells you right here, those who are etheric Syrian soul group are usually very drawn to whales and dolphins. They also can be found in organizations and groups whose focus on healing Earth and conserving her resources. The majority of etheric Syrians are found among black, red, and brown races of the Earth. It has nothing to do with other demographics of people because, like I said, everything started with dark matter energy, which is carbon, and carbon is the building block of all civilization. So that means that everything started with blackness first. Then you had the brown and the red races, which is basically your indigenous people, right? Now, it tells you right here, an astronomer thinks an alien tech could be on the ocean floor. Not everyone agrees, right? Like I said, we only discover about 5% of the ocean. And you got 95% of the ocean is uncharted land. And it tells you right here, scientists have discovered a massive underground water reservoir larger than all the Earth's oceans combined, right? Why are they coming out with this, synopsis now? Why are they coming out with the information now? Because we are at the apex of full disclosure because the sun is going to expose everything. When solar cycle 25, so that means that is the great revealing of when you're talking about the so-called revelations. The revelation is to reveal what is hidden, what was hidden. right? This is why they say amen in the Bible, because amen is actually Amen Ra. Amen Ra is the hidden one. The hidden one is the black sun. The black sun is connected to those who have a hidden identity, who is your so-called black people, right? So I'm going to show you another video because it's going to show you about this guy. He came across an ocean within the ocean, and later he was basically unalive for putting that out on national television. So we're going to get to this right here. All right, here we go. We rolling. So man finds water underwater, right? Because you have different ecosystems underneath the water, right?
In the bottom of the ocean. It was while filming for Blue Planet in the Gulf of Mexico. And inside the ring of mussels was a lake. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm already underwater. And we went out over the water in this lake and tried to descend in it and bounced off. It was so super saline and dense that the submarine couldn't go down in it. We literally bounced off, and as we bounced off, we sent ripples heading back to the shoreline. It was insane. I've never seen anything like it.
Coincidentally, a few days after this,
In the bottom of the ocean.
Incidentally, a few days later, he was basically unalived, right? So that's what happens when you give people the true edification about the planet and the evolution of the planet and where it's going to be going in the future, right? So this is why you got to understand biblical context on the esoteric level. When you go to Genesis chapter 1, when they're talking about the inception of creation, it talks about how Satan separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension and created the firmament. The firmament is part of the spiritual cutoff. The spiritual cutoff is part of the liquid crystal polarization, which is a technology that's connected to the firmament that basically eradicates your magnetism, where you get your magic from, right? We finna get into it. I'm gonna show you that as we get through the presentation even more. So, also, right? So now you got to get into the context of why they're basically eating mermaids, right? Because as I was telling you before, when Satan separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension, that's when he created the firmament. The firmament is activated by way of liquid crystal polarization, which is a technology. That technology extracts oxygen within the firmament, which creates oxidation that steals electrons from the hemoglobin to where the cells start to break down intrinsically to where you start to age. So that basically put an encryption on the telomeres to where the chromosome is not basically working in harmony with the planet, meaning that you're spiritually cut off from your magnetism. So the immortalization, transformation, and the transduction by way of conjugation, that means that our physiology is connected to something higher. But this is why they had to cut off your telomeres by way of the firmament, right? Satan, who is basically your so-called God of the Bible, right? So this is why it's imperative to understand who you are genetically and why they created the firmament. Because the firmament is the reason why you don't have the ability of immortalized cell lines by way of regeneration. Because one thing you got to understand about the physiology of carbonated people on the planet who have the neuromelanin, our genetics is basically made up of 95% stardust. And one thing you got to understand about the genetic format of a starfish, it has the ability of regeneration. If you cut a starfish in half, it'll grow right back, right? It'll grow into two starfish. So starfish have a remarkable regenerative abilities, including regrowing lost arms and their brains. The process is slow. It can take up to a year. So the same thing actually is correlated to the genetic format of so-called black people. This is why you see the great majority of collapsosaurus turtles, they actually eat jellyfish, right? This is why you see tourists, they live for a long period of time, because that jellyfish basically creates immortalized cell lines to where the cells is able to replicate themselves on the infinite level, right? So this is also correlated with the crystal city within you, because the magnetites and the dendrites create more neurons, and the neurons create an infinite amount of diamonds around the brain, which is the 144,000 crystals. those crystals is going to activate the crystallization that's connected to your physiology, to where you transmute from 666, 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 protons, 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, to where you go into 616. That's crystallization when you have one neutron, right? Meaning that the neutrinos is going to activate your physiology. Because one thing you got to understand is that the carbonated body is an electromagnetic generator and a light code transducer. The light is intelligence. Intelligence is electromagnetic radiation. That electromagnetic radiation hits the crystals in the brain, because crystals, what does it do? It absorbs energy and it extracts energy, right? That is your epitome of a Christ consciousness, to where you have death and rebirth by way of regeneration, right? So before we get too far in the presentation, I got another video to show you, because as we get through the presentation, it's going to tell you why they eat the great majority of black people, because they understand that our physiology is connected to the great majority of these extraterrestrial entities. And the reason that is because they know our genetics, when it harmonizes with the sun in solar cycle 25, we are going to regenerate just like a mermaid. We're going to regenerate like a starfish, right? We're going to live long like turtles, because we're connected to Turtle Island, right? So I'm going to show you this video that basically proves that the great majority of extraterrestrial life comes from the ocean, right? So I'm going to show you this video here. This is a story about a woman who came across in the 1950s. This lady, she came across an extraterrestrial entity, right? A draconian reptilian. Matter of fact, let me show you this also. See, the great majority of everything is within the factions of the ocean, as above, so below. Because like I was telling you, Satan separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension. So that's why the Sirian star constellation actually doesn't work in harmony with planet Earth. It's cut off from the Fibonacci sequence of planet Earth, right? Because the heavens were actually connected to three-dimensional reality, when it was basically a fifth-dimensional civilization, when it was connected to the galactic center in the beginning of the first golden age, in the first sun cycle, in the first 6,000 years of the planet. So when you look at this video right here, it's showing you an extraterrestrial entity that's coming from the ocean. This is coming from the NY Post video. Not a coincidence, right? And this thing looked like it has two brains. Looks like a smaller version of Yakub, right? The great majority, so everybody's study just looking up in the sky when you should be looking at the ocean, right? Because one thing you got to understand about the ocean, it's connected to the firmament. And the firmament is connected to the moon, because the moon is the external hard drive of the planet Earth that works in synergy with Saturn. So this is why the great majority of the spiritual cutoff in itself is also putting encryption on the water. This is why you don't see the great majority of, these entities that's coming from the water, but they're starting to reveal themselves, because we're in solar cycle 25, right? So I'm going to show you another video. This guy talks about how there's other entities in the ocean, right? And other oceans within the ocean. You cannot make this up. So if you got all these people, I got all these receipts, you got all these people coming out talking about the ocean, there has to be some type of truth that's connected to it. And the reason they hide it, because we are the hidden one. I told you. Amen. Amen Ra, the hidden one, which is the black sun. You hid the black people who was connected to the black sun. So now, by way of the great revealing, everything has to be revealed. The truth is going to come out. Hold on for a second.
He said we tracked many that were transversing the undercurrents of the ocean at lightning speeds, but we could never catch up to it. We knew they were down there. And he said one particular occasion, They were down in the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean on a very highly classified mission. They were just a couple hundred miles from Antarctica, and they were deep. And he didn't say exactly how deep. He said we were at a maximum depth.
Oh, he said Antarctica because remember I told you they have a no-fly zone that creates the sigil of the Khazarian Tamga, which is basically the epitome of the sigil of Moloch, which is the sigil of Lucifer. So there's an encryption over that geographical landmass to where you don't see these subterranean kingdoms that's connected to these oceans.
And we had no lights on, and we had some portals that we could see out of. One of the crew members called the bridge and says, you need to come down here in the torpedo room. You need to see this. So the captain and the first officer went down there, and they had to crawl up to a certain area and look out. He said, look out. He looked out. He said, oh my God, that's an underwater city down there. Probably as big as New York City. It was spread out.
He said there's an underwater city underneath Antarctica, big as New York City, big as 100 New York cities, right? You cannot make this up. I got the receipts, baby. I got the receipts.
And there were lights all over the place, and there were buildings down there. And he thought, are we imagining this? And the other crew member, and he thought, are we imagining this? That's an underwater city down there. Probably as big as New York City. It was spread out, and there were lights all over the place, and there were buildings down there. And he thought, are we imagining this? And the other crew members saying, no, sir, I'm seeing the same thing you're seeing. And the captain's asking them to describe what they're seeing to make sure he's seeing what they're seeing. Yes. He said this would have been thousands and thousands of feet under Antarctica. He said we couldn't go any deeper. We couldn't go down there. But he said that changed my opinion of the possibilities of life being on the bottom of the ocean. That's a very interesting story he told.
Very compelling, especially coming from him.
Exactly. And another question I asked him was you speak with other submariners. I mean, you're in a society of former submariners. How many others saw this? He said, quite a few others.
What a compelling story, Rick. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being on the show.
Good to be here, Emery. Thank you.
But that's how you know what I'm saying? Anytime you connect yourself to these CIA groups and the military, the great majority of them, they have to sign non-disclosure agreements, right? They got to sign that to hide the information, to hide the truth. Because we in that time period. And I think, but yeah, I got another video to show you. I got a lot of receipts for this. I be forgetting. I got a lot of receipts. So, like I said, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you like this type of content, man, like, giving us the true inception of creation and how everything is connected to our history. When you start, going down the rabbit hole, hit 777 in the chat, right? And now I'm going to show you this other video that basically talks about how you had UFOs coming from the ocean or coming from a lake. And it's about this woman who, in the 1950s, she killed a reptilian. So I'm going to play the video.
Host Selah Shalom, and I'm here today with the Israelite sister, and she's going to share her testimony about a family member in the South, I'll just leave it at that, in the South, where, was he a great-grandmother?
Great aunt.
A great aunt, a black woman, killed, dead, a reptilian. Now, some may be in disbelief of the whole reptilian agenda. Some people may not believe it. Some people think it's a myth, and while others think it's real. But here we have from our own community an Israelite sister, not somebody from the Gentile nation or outsider, but somebody within the community. And as Israelites, we wouldn't make up stories to one another about something like this. So she's going to go and give her account of what her great aunt experienced in the 50s when this event took place. and you can go ahead and just start.
Okay. My great aunt relayed this story to me. It was in the late 80s, and my mom and I had gone to visit her to check on her and see how she was doing. She was sitting outside on her front porch, so we were talking, and she always kept her rifle, her double-barrel shotgun, right next to her in her rocking chair. My mother was joking with her about the gun, and she said, yeah, I always keep my gun with me because something happened way back a long time ago. And she said, I'm gonna tell y'all this story. And she said, it's God, as she called him, is my witness. I swear for God, I'm not lying. So she said it was back in the 50s. She said one night she and her husband was in the house, and he was asleep because they were farmers. And she said the dog started barking, the pigs started doing what they do, oinking, and the cows started mooing. And she said the animals just went crazy on their farm, and they had a lot of animals, not just cows and pigs. They had ducks, they had everything. And so she said that they were just screaming like something was going on. She said she tried to get her husband to go outside and see, and he told her, oh, it's nothing, just leave it alone, just go to bed. So she said, no, something going on, the animal's going crazy. So she grabbed her shotgun and she went out to the porch. And she said she didn't see nothing immediately, but then she looked down toward the barn, and where there was a big pond on the side of the barn. And she said she saw a frog man, is what she described him, coming up from the side of the barn. And she said it was walking toward her, and she said it wasn't that tall. She stood about maybe 5'4", so she said it was a little bit taller than her. But she said he had webbed hands, and she said he was walking straight to her, and she yelled for it to stop, and she said it kept walking. So she said she stepped off her porch, and she took her double-barrel shotgun and she shot it dead.
And to interject for a second, she described that the blood of the reptilian was green.
So then her husband heard the shotgun go off. He came outside. Now, they were elderly at this point, because in the 80s when she was relaying this story, I think she was in her 80s at that point, but so it was early 50s. So she was already in her 50s because they was raising their grandchildren. And she said that she was afraid for the family. And she said when her husband came outside, that was my great uncle, my great grandfather's brother. She said he stepped off the porch, and she said, look, I done killed something. I done killed something. It's not human. So they walked out there to the side of the barn, and she said they had killed, she said she called it the frog man. But I know it to be a reptilian. And at that point, when she was relating that story to me, I had never heard anything like that before. And she kept saying, as God is my witness, I swear for God, I'm not telling a lie. This is the honest God's truth. And so, and she wasn't known in the community anyway to be someone who lied. She always was an honest and upright woman. And so she said her and her husband, my great uncle, she said they buried that thing, because we asked, well, where was it? Where was it? She said they buried it right down there where they killed it, near the barn. And so after they buried it, then the animals got quiet again. And of course, I'm going to deviate for a minute. You know that they always tell you to watch nature, and that's what we have to do. Right. Like when the tsunami hit in Indonesia in 2004, they reported that days before it hit, that the dogs and cats and all the animals had gone up into the mountains, because they are in tune with the Creator. So they know to flee in instances like that. Well, her animals, they were trying to give off a warning signal. And so they knew something bad was there. But so anyway, they killed it and they buried it. He told her not to tell anybody that story. So she said she didn't tell anybody. So she said about a month later, a little bit less than a month, she said it was nighttime again, and they were in their bed. And she said this time, this blue light came over the whole house, and they lived in what you call one of those little bitty shacks long time ago. In the countryside, way in the country. They had like several hundred acres of land. That land is still in my family today. And so she said this time her husband got up with her, and the animals went crazy again. So she said they went out there with both of their shotguns, went to the porch, and they saw what they called a UFO. a flying saucer.
Now, was it in the air or was it on the ground?
It had landed on the ground beside the pond.
Okay.
So she said it was on the ground, and she said it opened up, and she said, oh.
Like I said, everything comes from the waters, right? Satan separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension. As above, so below when you study the Emerald Tablets, right? Because one thing you got to understand is about the celestial seas is a portal to the bodies of the ocean. So this is why the moon pulls on the tides of the ocean, because the ocean in itself is connected to the moon because it's being used as a system for reincarnation. But that's a whole different transmission. I already broke that down a long time ago on how the moon is operated by a binary code system that's connected to the gematria body, and your gematria body is what connects you to the simulation. And the simulation is what creates energy and motion, which is your emotions that's connected to people, places, and possessions. This is why you got to follow the path of the middle way so you don't get stuck here, right? This is why you have to get away from the third density lure system of the soul entrapment of the religion that basically took you out of your sovereign capacity. This is why they created maritime law, water law, that's connected to the caste system that puts you under the jurisdiction under the Act of Parliament, which is also connected to the 1724 Black Christian Codes, which is also connected to the Catholic Church. So this is why I said you got to understand what's going on. Everything comes from the water. Why you think they have water law that's connected to their system? That's because everything comes from the water. The water is a portal to the higher dimensions.
Or they coming to kill us because we done killed this thing. She said they came off the ship, and she said they went straight to the mound where they had buried this thing, and they put their hand over the ground, and this dead frogman thing that she killed, it just came up out of the ground. It wasn't alive. It was flat and it was dead. But they took that thing and they put it on the ship. Then she said they went over to the pond and they raised up their hands, and a spaceship came out of their pond. Now their pond was bigger than a regular sized pond. It was almost the size of like a small lake. But she said it had flown. That's how he had, I guess, got there. It had flown into the bottom of the lake. And if any of you all keep up with some of the stories that other countries recount about the UFOs, they'll tell you that some people, especially over in China and the Asian areas, spot them with their spaceships coming up out of the deep water. So they got the spaceship out of the water, and she said, and they looked at them, didn't do anything, didn't say anything, didn't come toward them, got back on the ship and zoomed back into the sky. And she said for the longest she didn't tell anybody. She said, but she told a couple people later on that said she was crazy. So she was just telling my mom and I that to let us know that that's why she always kept her double-barrel shotgun right next to her. Even she said, when I go to the chicken coop, anywhere, I always, because I don't know if they ever going to come back. And that's what she said.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So here you have it. A real life testimony of an Israelite sister whose family member have come in contact with what we know today as a reptilian and killed it in the 50s, buried it. They came back and got the body and the UFO and left. And this is in the 50s, not too far right after the Roswell incident. Just to put that out there.
And you notice right after the Roswell incident, that's when you had Hitler's regime. That's when they started to have, the G-force of creating BDELL UFOs, right? So this is why they was creating super soldiers, because the regular soldiers, their physiology and their genetic format wasn't working in harmony with the G-force of the UFO, because they got their transmission on how to build these UFOs from the Ashtar Command, which is a negative faction of the Pleiadians, right? That's a whole different topic as well. Now, we're going to get back to the presentation at hand. Like I said, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. If you like this type of information and how it's giving you downloads, put 777 in the chat, man. That's the God frequency. Because that's what the golden age is all about. It's transmuting yourself from human to God. And it happens by way of the activation of your neurological faculties. You can't be a god if you're thinking in a low vibrational state. What makes you a god is your higher mental faculties, supreme intelligence. It has nothing to do with, wearing crystals and wearing head wraps, right? That's what makes you a god. It's all about equilibrium, balance. If you're a balanced individual, mentally and spiritually and vibrationally, that's when you're going to ascend in this spiritual metamorphosis when you're talking about a great awakening period, right? So as we get back to the presentation, I was telling you about the regeneration transformation system, about the physiology of so-called Black people, because our genetic format is intrinsically different than everybody else's on the planet, right? And I'm saying that from a humble standpoint. That's just the reality of everything. That is basically the diametrical differences from non-ether and 6-ether. Non-ether dissipates into 6-ether when it's at a low vibrational state. 6-ether is basically the embodiment of planet Earth that is connected to a genetic mutation by way of connected to the clay age of mankind, because mankind is a kind of a man that was genetically spliced into existence in 4086 BC when you're talking about the Canaanite. Because the Canaanite, they don't have the ability of the regeneration system to basically to where the cells is able to replicate themselves on an infinite level. They don't have that ability. And the reason they don't have that ability is because they're basically the cursed seed in the book of Leviticus, right? So this is why they used to eat the great majority of Black people. This is why you got to read this book called The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption, and the Homoeroticism within the United States slave culture, right? This is why they looked at you as subhuman. When you go to the G3526 Strong Concordance, the word Christian translates to the word Black. Black is what makes you subhuman according to their system, right? So this is why they used to eat you, because now you no longer operate from a God frequency, you're at a lower state. So this is why they got to keep you as the common denominator in society, so you don't know who you are. If you don't know who you are, this is when they feed on your energy, right? So you got to read this book, because one thing you got to understand about the carbonated man and woman on the planet and the neuromelanin activation is that our physiology is divine food, which is basically the elixir of immortality on planet Earth, right? This is why everything that's connected to Metatron's cube sucks up microscopic waves of energy and it pulls on your energy, right? Just like the moon pulls on your energy. You got technology pulling on your energy. Now, when you're eating these genetically modified foods, you got the parasites pulling on your energy. And not only that, you got the European Union pulling on your energy. When you're talking about, their corporate system, when you're talking about the Roman occupational government, everything they do is an energy extraction, whether if it's through technology or they're eating your ass, right? That's what it's all about. So it talks about how Nat Turner was consumed, after his execution. Many people had questions, accused of the information being fabricated. So it talks about this. You got to read this book called The Delectable Negro by Vincent Woodward, right? So he was basically surrounded by a coven of vampires. Nat Turner was. A coven of vampires basically feeded on his physiology. They wanted to take upon the intrinsic energy of the power that he basically had, right? Because everything that is extracted from Canaanite culture is actually a Luciferian system. You got to read this book right here by Bobby Hemmett called Melanin People, How to Eat and Devour Their Energy. White Luciferians reveal their secrets, right? Because the Luciferian is the epitome of false light. The false light, you can propagate it if you know the truth. So this is why they lie to you so much, and they got to keep you hidden. You the hidden one. You the black sun. The black sun is connected to nature. This is why they lie to you about history, religion, and everything. Because if you don't know who you are, you're not going to understand what's going on and what time it is on the planet. So like, as I was telling you before, Canaanite culture is connected to cannibalism, because cannibalism is Baal worship. Baal is actually Moloch. Moloch is Enlil. Enlil, when you study the Tetragrammaton, it means agreeable and disagreeable. And then when you go to the H1408 Strong Concordance, the word God is equated to the word Gad. Gad is an anagram for the word Dag, which is Dagon. The Pope, he wears the hat of Dagon, which is a fish god that basically subjugates you by way of the caste system that's connected to the dark priesthood of the Vatican. So this is why they got to hit your ass with tricknology and semantics every time. This is why they got to feed on your physiology. Cannibalism comes from the Canaanite culture because they don't have the genetic format to harmonize with the sun. So they got to eat you. They got to devour your blood in order to harmonize with the planet. Just like how we get energy from the sun, they get energy from our blood, right? This is a vampiric system that feeds on the energy of the indigenous people. That's what you must understand. And the same thing takes place when they eat these mermaids, right? Because our genetic format is the elixir of immortality on the planet. Because we have immortalized cell lines. This is why they use the melanin in computer chips in the form of transduction. This is why they use melanin to coat the ships. You can't go to outer space unless the spaceship is coated with melanin, right? Otherwise, it'll be set ablaze. It'll catch fire, right? So neuromelanin, melanin carbon, is basically a protectorate from the universe. This is why they got to keep you at a low vibrational state. They don't want you to know who the fuck you is, right? So it's not a coincidence that stuff like this happened. You got 2 brothers going missing from a flight. They was found shot dead in the Georgia mountain, right? Not a coincidence. And then when you go to the comments, it talks about how this European system, and this is even coming from a European woman. I saw a comment on another post that there's even more black people going missing in the Atlanta area. And it talks about how racism, I believe the police will cover this up. And then it tells you right here, this sister, she says, I was driving through Stone Mountain heading to Decatur. I was new to Georgia, so I still had my New Jersey tags. It was about 5 to 6 p.m. I was pulled over by a young cop, a young European cop. He said he was from Philadelphia and asked where I was going. He told me to get out of there and stay there. Do not come back here at night. I took that as my warning, and thank God for this guy, the officer just basically giving her that information. So people are starting to come up missing, and it's going to be, it's going to be an intrinsic amount of people. Because remember, I was telling y'all about Project Zypher and Project Pogo on how they want to unalive an intrinsic amount of black people in the form of the population. And the reason that is because they, like I said, they need our genetics. They need our genetics because, like I said, as the sun gets hotter, if you don't have that neuromelanin activation to where you're able to crystallize, it's over for you, right? And just because you're a so-called black person doesn't mean that you get ascension rights to the higher dimensions. Because a lot of you been following the dietary system of the European. A lot of you been following the ideologies of the European. A lot of you been putting straight hair wigs on your head. You've been cutting the transmission off from your head to where you're not able to connect with the sun with these lace fronts and these wigs. You're cutting off your transmission. You're not able to harmonize with the planet. So you have the mindset of those who don't have a genetic format to harmonize with the sun. So when the galactic center opens up to the Golden Gate, your ass is going to be eradicated along with those who have the cursed genetics. Because what I was telling you guys before, recessive genes means that you're basically feeble to the planet. You can't harmonize with the sun. You can't harmonize with the UV radiation like spectrum, right? You can't harmonize with it. So this is also correlated to the prophecies of Hollow Earth. Now, one thing you got to understand about the Hollow Earth facts, I was telling y'all about how no airplanes are permitted to fly over the North and South poles, right? When you're talking about the Arctic Circle, because the Arctic Circle is the land of Magnus. The land of Magnus is the home of the black sun that's connected to the galactic center. So you got to but you got to watch all these videos when I was talking about, the Silver Key and the Golden Key. So you got the DUMBs, which is the deep underground military bunker systems, were specifically built in very close proximity in inner earth interests. I'm located in southern Indiana, which is kind of by, Kentucky, right on the demarcation line. They have an interest to Hollow Earth in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, right? You got 7 entrances all around the planet, cave systems that leads you to Hollow Earth. So that is also associated with Google Maps, showing both holes. So the Earth's atmosphere is ocean, magnetic field, all exhibits a torus fields and dynamics, every atom, cell. So Hollow Earth, they've been knowing about this, through the Theosophical Society. They know about, the Crystal City, Argartha. They know about the city of Shambhala because, like I said, that's where the inception of creation, when you're talking about the Black Sun. I already broke that down in a whole different transmission about a year and a half ago, right? Hollow Earth is found in the history of many ancient civilizations. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, it is written that he visited a subterranean kingdom in the bowels of the earth. And this is also connected to Greek mythology as well, right? So, like I said, all this is harmonizing. The synchronicities are basically syncing. NASA found a diamond in space that is 5 times larger than Earth. What you got to understand is that this is basically a dog whistle. This is basically talking about the crystallization as we segue to the golden age through the Golden Gate, which is connected to Ophiuchus, which is the 13th zodiac wheel. Because Ophiuchus is Christ walking on water by way of resurrection with the activation of the magnetites and the dendrites, which is basically the diamonds in your brain, which makes you a whole brain thinker, which makes you holy, right? So the diamond they're basically talking about, they're talking about crystallization of the neuromelanated body when it works in harmony with the sun as we get to the galactic center and we're going through the Golden Gate. That's why they're coming out with this types of publications, right? So where you don't understand the mythology behind it. That's why they're coming out with it. Because one thing you got to understand about crystallization takes place when the telomeres is activated, because the telomeres is basically the gene expression to your chromosomes. And your chromosomes is connected to the energetic frequency of the song that creates immortalized cell lines. And that immortalized cell lines is based on transformation, transduction, and conjugation. And that conjugation has the same genetic format of the mermaids, of the starfish. Because our physiology is made up of 95% stardust. So it shows you right here in many different cultures through transgressive art and the cosmology of as above, so below, that Hollow Earth is real. That's where the great majority of these mermaids are coming from. The great majority of these entities, right? Tells you in the book of Genesis, the book of Job, Holy Quran 65:12. It tells you Allah, it is who he sent the 7 heavens. Because you got 7 different layers that get to Hollow Earth, and then you got 7 different cave systems to where you get to Hollow Earth. Then you got 7th heaven, when you got 7 star systems in the Orion star constellation. These are basically portals to the Hollow Earth. Now, also within the factions of Hollow Earth, you got the Captua people, who are basically giants. Like I said, they taunt you by way of your culture. They taunt your culture in the name of parades, and this is how they show a negative credence to those who are basically connected to Mother Earth, right? Because like I said, none of this stuff is mythology, giants and mermaids, right? Because when you go to the book of Deuteronomy, it tells you the size of the Nephilim and the giants, which is basically 9 cubits. And 1 cubit of a man is 18 inches. You take 18 times 9, you get 162 inches. Divided by 12, you get 13.5 feet. That is the size of the Nephilim when you understand the esoteric science of the book of Deuteronomy, right? Everything is actually in the publication of the Bible, but you just got to know how to read the motherfucker. If you don't know how to read the Bible, right, and you reading it like a bobblehead Christian who is getting his edification from Pastor Porkchop, of course you're going to be lost in the sauce, because he's not giving you the esoteric of it. He's giving you the exoteric. He's giving you the commercialized information that he learned in seminary school, right? Which has got his charter from the Vatican. So that means that he is programmed to indoctrinate you. He is programmed to give you misinformation. So that's why you got to do your own edification by your damn self. Independent research. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that basically, that is the end of my presentation. right? Because like I said, we in that time period. So I'm going to give a brief synopsis. The beginning points of the video, I started out with a video talking about a woman. She was giving her synopsis about a story that she read about how there have black mermaids within the oceans, and how this guy, he came across them and he had to sign a non-disclosure agreement and things of that nature. So the company he was working for was called Trident Seafoods when I did my own independent research on it. So this was the company that was basically a privatized company that was also connected to the Ukrainian mafia, who was also known as the Canaanites. So this is why this company, they was basically extracting the mermaids from the ocean and then feeding them to the elites for millions of dollars. Because one thing you got to understand about the physiology of mermaids, they have the ability of regeneration transformation because they have immortalized cell lines, right? So that means that their physiology is the elixir of immortality. It even tells you all throughout Japanese folklore, right, that if you consume a mermaid, it grants you immortality. It also talks about the Yok-Yoks in Australia. They talk about the mermaid mythology. Then we only discover about 5% of the ocean. 95% of the ocean is uncharted land. They show you in the Book of Enoch through neoclassical art, mermaids are real, right? It's connected to the Nomo, right? You got to understand what's going on the planet, because otherwise, as we get through this Great Awakening period, you're not going to understand what's going on, because you got to read Henry Kissinger's book called White House Years. He was basically the Secretary of State in 1975, and he was basically demonstrating, he said that black life on the planet is at unstable heights. It's at a national security, meaning that he wants to unalive the great majority of them. So this is connected to Project Pogo and Project Zypher, right? Because they need the neuromelanin in order to survive the shift. You ain't going to be able to survive the shift. I don't care how much transhumanism or cybernetic dictatorship that you try to propagate through the system. If you don't have that neuromelanin activated, you're not going to survive. I don't care if you try to merge human with machine. I don't care about none of that. If you're not connected to the original blueprint of planet Earth, and you don't have the authenticity of the neurocarbonated people on the planet, and you don't have that genetic format, you're not going to survive, right? And I'm not saying that everybody, just because you got melanin, that you're going to ascend. A lot of you have the mind of the ones who basically enslaved you, right? So that means that you're going to be spiritually cut off from the fifth dimension. This is why we have the great separation. You got to come amongst and detach from individuals who is connected to the caste system of the European. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this video. Share this video.
1014.
We will put an end to this madness. It's me again, God, I know it's